You need to be judged upon, or in any way, whether it was good or bad. People need to be assessed, not judged, upon their decisions based on the information they had at the time. And I think that's really a key point I want to get across from project management, because I think it's something that's not necessarily embraced at the moment. If I just quickly pause there, because I've talked quite a while, how do you find that sort of statement?
I think it's fair. It's a fair thing to say. Like, you should be judged on information you have and not on information you don't have, right? Like you said, it's a question, why didn't I have that information, obviously? And that's kind of a question for the larger organization, and maybe, the hierarchy you have and how that works and who sends you information and what information is available to each kind of role. But I think it's reasonable. I mean, even as a project manager or any kind of professional, when you don't know something and you were never given the information, I don't think you should be judged on things you didn't know about. You also, I think, in a lot of organizations, you see that in junior positions where people expect you to know a lot of things or have skills and things that you may not have, and they don't tell you. And then suddenly that becomes an issue. I don't think that's fair either. If you tell someone you should know about this, and this is the way to kind of learn about this, and then they don't do it, obviously, they should be judged for that. But I don't know. I think it's a fair statement to not be judged for information you didn't have at the time when you made a decision. Yeah, that's kind of my opinion, and I don't know. Generally, I found interesting the idea that you can pull from different methodologies. Like, you talked a little bit about waterfall and agile, and pulling ideas from these different methodologies, I think, is the way forward. And you can see that in literature as well that I've been reading lately for fused methodologies, where it's kind of a waterfall project, but then you have agile approaches within that project.
Yeah, 100%. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment, or one of the programs I'm working within, is doing exactly that. It's got elements that are delivering via agile because it makes sense to do so, and there are other pieces which are delivering via more linear waterfall effect program management methodology. I completely agree. I think that toolbox size way of working is definitely going to grow. But Frederick, do you think it's fair of me to say that in organizations within project management, that actually people are assessed by the outcome of the project rather than the information they had at the time and the decisions they made, and whether they were fair?
Yeah, it's a very for me, it makes sense that people should be judged or assessed on the information that was available to them when they made a decision. And but based on that, the combinations and the complex situation of a project is almost impossible to evaluate. But people make the decisions on the best of their knowledge. That's at least what we want to think, at least. And decision making is such a interesting area, and both in practice and in research as well. And it's so difficult. It's part of my research is looking into how project managers can treat issues in projects in a long term or short term. I mean, if a problem is happening in a project, is the project manager treating the symptoms of a project in the short term or in a long term perspective, and what is the long term effects of those short term risk mitigation actions in that sense? But yeah, I definitely agree with you that project managers should be assessed on the information they had at the time, but they're not always done. That's not always the case in this moment. I mean, people want someone to take responsibility of why a project, and that is in essence the project manager. But if that person had the information by the time, that's always a discussion to have.
It is, and there's some really interesting points. I could talk all day about risk and organisational culpability and that, but I won't go into it now. Sorry, Nick, go on.
Let's throw something into the mix just for a second and say, actually, no, you know what? No, we disagree there. I don't think you should be, and that your project should be judged on the merits of what it has accomplished and not on the information that you have had available at the time. So a colleague of mine, Dr. Christine Unser-Hitzenberger from the University of Leeds, is funnily enough doing a webinar tonight with the APM based on stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement. And one of the things that project professionals should be thinking about ideally is how do you bring that community of stakeholders with you on the journey of your project. And if we were to take a binary look at this and say, actually, let's just get straight down to the wire. If you've done your job properly as a project manager, part of that is basically making sure that you're engaging with your stakeholders, that they are fully aware of what is happening at each important stage of the actual project. Because otherwise, what you're doing is you're effectively working in isolation. You're saying, okay, this is my project, this is my project team, I'll see you guys in 12 months, and this will be the deliverable. And we had that experience very much, myself, Fred, and Vasilis, when we started working on developing this module together. So there was a module that we're working on, and it is actually really quite a complex module because it's as a result of lockdown. It means that everything has to be done virtually now. So we had to really think about strategies and techniques and tools to implement that. And my historic approach to this would have been, here's the stuff you need, here are the bits and pieces, see you guys in 12 weeks. That'll be great. Hopefully everything will work out great. And they rightly said, no, it's not going to work that way. We need to obviously have much more regular meetings. We need to be engaged with our stakeholders. We need to keep lines of communication open. So the point that I'm making is, actually, if you are judged solely on the merit of the actual end result, what have you been doing in terms of your stakeholder engagement during that process? Why have you not updated your stakeholders, whether it's through a communication campaign, whether it's through social media, for example, whether it's through general traditional media, for example, where you are constantly updating on the challenges and the changing nature and changing priorities of what was happening in your particular project. And I think on that basis, stakeholders are going to have a lot of different perspectives, for sure. But if you can show that going back to what you said earlier, that you're listening, that you're open to information, and then that you're then taking that information and you're synthesizing it to make a decision, and you can demonstrate that process and the decision-making process to your stakeholders, then it doesn't matter so much what the end result will be, because if people understand how we got to where we ended in terms of the project, whether we overachieved the project outcomes, whether we underachieved the project outcomes, or whether we achieved what exactly that we were set out to do, then I think you're more likely to have a receptive and friendly ear, let's say, in terms of how the actual project itself is judged. I think some of the big challenges, especially with large-scale, complex, novel projects, sometimes where the government gets involved in terms of a new IT infrastructure and so on and so forth, a lot of it can be opaque. And yes, there's some consultation at the beginning and so on and so forth, but the process is, a lot of it can be opaque. And all we hear about failures A, B, and C. We overspent this much money, it underachieved in this area, and ultimately it was abandoned. I think stakeholder engagement is crucial in all projects, and it leads to this idea of, so I'm a big proponent of open innovation. So Chesbrough in 2003, I think it was, came up with this theory called open innovation. And traditionally, what an organization or a company would do is they would innovate within the staff that they had, or within the boundaries of the organizations they had. So these are our employees, these are our departments, we're going to drive innovation internally. And actually what Chesbrough said, and through the concept of open innovation, is let's make those barriers more transparent. Let's break those barriers down, and then we can start to crowdsource different ideas external to our organization or external to our institution to help us actually be more innovative. And what I would like to see is a more kind of open approach to project management, where you do engage with your stakeholders and you do take ideas, and it helps to shape your project. The big debate is whether that's achievable through a waterfall approach, or maybe an agile approach, or maybe a mix of the two. And you and I, Carl, completely agree on this concept of the toolkit. And I hope that in the future we'll get to a point where there will be no more agile and waterfall debate. There will be a set of modular tools that in processes that I, as a project professional, as an organization, can implement and use to drive the project forward. So anyway, going back to that earlier point, yeah, I think in terms of whether I should be judged in terms of what I've been able to deliver, it's not just that binary endpoint. It's how did I get there, but then how did I ensure I communicated that process to all of the interested parties, so that I'm judged throughout the entire management process, or the entire process management. And it gives a sense of community and ownership to different stakeholders. Like, okay, yes, I feel like I'm part of this particular project. And it might be that we look at, say, for example, you know, a four matrix, and we say, okay, well, low power, low influence, or high power, high influence. And you have to communicate with your stakeholders in different ways, depending on where they sit within that particular quadrant, whether they have a high degree of power over the project, but low interest, for example. That's certainly how I would see it. Now, that's a nice conceptual idea, but Carl, how do you think that actually works in real life? In real projects?
I mean, I think you've summed it perfectly. I think exactly what you've been saying there. You know, it should be around stakeholder management as you go along. You know, it should be the case of failure of a project shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. You know, if a project is going to not deliver what you originally expected it to deliver, that process of deciding that, your stakeholders should be along for the ride with that one as well. It shouldn't just be a case of they wake up tomorrow morning and find a note saying, by the way, this is now axed. I completely agree with you on that one. I think the point I was trying to make around that was about saying, actually, you need evidence for behind your decisions the entire way along. You need to be able to evidence it and stand by those decisions. And it kind of loops back to what we were saying about that strategic view. It's being able to sit back and go, why are we making a decision on this? Why are we saying that this is good at this point? Have we got what we need? Yes, we believe we do. We're going to proceed down this route. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? We didn't have this. Okay, well, now we can either shift our position and move up there, or we actually have to bring this to an end. But no, I completely agree that stakeholders shouldn't be surprised by the success or failure of a project. I mean, particularly a success. If they're surprised by a success of a project, you've done something wrong across the life cycle. I 100% agree with you there. So no, I think you're very much right on that point.